Maya Bennett stepped out of the bathroom, steam curling behind her like ghosts. The towel wrapped around her body was small, barely covering what it needed to. Water dripped from her hair onto her bare shoulders, trailing down her collarbone. She froze. Leo Castellan was standing in the hallway, not moving, just existing there like a statue carved from stone and rage. His jaw was clenched so tight she could see the muscle jump beneath his skin. His chest rose and fell unevenly, like breathing had become a manual task he was failing at. He'd been on his way to his office, probably to grab files he'd forgotten. Now he was stuck. His eyes dragged over her skin like a man starving, taking in every inch of exposed flesh with an intensity that made the air between them crackle. His hands curled into fists at his sides, knuckles white with the effort of not reaching for her. 4 months. 4 months of this dance, this game, this slow, burning torture that neither of them would name. The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. The only sound was the rain, and his uneven breathing, and the thundering of her own heartbeat in her ears. Maya. His voice came out low, barely above a whisper, choking with the kind of restraint that looked painful. Stop testing me. She didn't move, didn't retreat back into the safety of the bathroom, didn't apologize, or cover herself, or do any of the things a good, obedient contract wife might do. Instead, she took a step closer. Just one. But it was enough to make his entire body go rigid. Why? Her voice was soft, but deliberate, each word a match struck in the dark. Can't you handle it? Something flickered in his eyes, something dangerous and desperate and barely leashed. You walk around my home, he said, voice getting rougher with each word. In robes that slip off your shoulders, in silk that shows everything. You practice yoga in front of my office in those tight clothes. You cook in my kitchen wearing nothing but my shirts. He took a step toward her, and Maya's pulse kicked into overdrive. You think I don't see what you're doing? Another step. You think I haven't noticed every single calculated move you've made for the past 3 months? Then why haven't you done anything about it? She lifted her chin, defiant. You made rules, Leo. Separate bedrooms. No physical intimacy. Stay invisible. She laughed, the sound bitter. Well, I'm tired of being invisible. You want to be seen? His pupils dilated until the gray of his irises nearly disappeared. He closed the distance between them in 2 strides, backing her against the wall. His hands slammed on either side of her head, caging her in. Is that what this is? You want my attention, Maya? She could feel the heat radiating off his body, could smell his cologne mixed with something darker, something that spoke of control stretched to its breaking point. I want you to stop pretending, she whispered, looking directly into those storm-gray eyes. Stop pretending you don't watch me. Stop pretending you don't want me. Stop pretending this marriage is just business when you look at me like you're starving every day. His breath came faster, harsher. His gaze dropped to her mouth, then lower, following the water droplet that slid down her throat and disappeared beneath the towel. You don't know what you're asking for? Don't I? She reached up slowly and touched his jaw, felt the muscle jump beneath her fingers, felt the roughness of stubble he hadn't shaved. Check your own pulse, husband. Check the way you're breathing. Check how close you're standing when you claim you don't want me. Leo's hand left the wall and wrapped around her wrist. Not painful, but firm, holding her touch against his face like he couldn't help himself. If I touch you, he whispered, voice shaking, I won't stop. Do you understand that? I've spent 4 months controlling myself. 4 months of cold showers and sleepless nights, and pretending I don't hear you moving around in your room. 4 months of dying every time you walk past me. The towel slipped, just slightly, just enough that she had to grab it with her free hand. Leo's eyes followed the movement, watched her fingers clutch the damp fabric, and something in his face cracked completely. Maya! Her name came out like a prayer and a curse. I can't! Then don't. She stepped closer until her body was almost touching his, until she could feel every rigid line of him. Don't control it. Don't bury it. Don't pretend anymore. His forehead dropped to the wall beside her head, his whole body trembling. She could feel his breath hot against her neck, could feel the war happening inside him. You think you want this, he rasped, but you don't understand what I've been holding back. What I am when I stop controlling myself. Then show me, Leo. Her voice was barely a whisper. Stop making threats with silence. Stop torturing both of us. Either touch me or stop looking at me like you're dying to. For one breathless, endless moment, she thought he would. His hand moved from the wall to her throat, not squeezing, just resting there. His thumb pressed against her racing pulse. His body shifted, pressing closer, and she felt exactly how much he wanted her through the thin barrier of fabric between them. His mouth hovered near hers, so close she could feel his breath. One day, Maya. His voice was wrecked, raw, barely human. I won't stop myself, and when that happens, you'll never want another man again. I'll ruin you for everyone else. Then he pulled away violently, stepped back like she'd burned him. His chest was heaving, his hands shaking, his eyes wild with everything he was refusing to give into. Get out of my sight, he said roughly. Now, before I forget every promise I made to myself about this marriage. Maya stood there against the wall, heart pounding, skin flushed, breathless. She could walk away, could retreat like she had every other time, could let this moment pass like all the others. But she was done retreating. The only thing you'll regret, she said softly, holding his gaze, is wasting whatever time we have left. She walked past him, close enough that her arm brushed his, close enough that the towel shifted dangerously with the movement. She felt his eyes on her with every step, knew he was watching the water droplets sliding down her bare legs, watching her walk away from him when everything in his body was screaming to stop her. Behind her, she heard something shatter. Glass or control, she didn't know. She didn't turn around. She kept walking, feeling victory and frustration and desire coursing through her veins in equal measure. This was how they survived each other. In moments. In almost. In the terrible space between wanting and having. But it wasn't always like this. Welcome to our channel before we begin this intense emotional journey between Maya and Leo. Please like, comment where you're watching from, and share this story. I will love to connect with you all, to understand how they became trapped in this emotional war, how a marriage built on contracts and desperation became a battlefield of desire and restraint. We have to go back to 4 months ago. Back to the beginning, the phone call that changed everything. 4 months earlier, Maya got a call that changed her life. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, while Maya was in a strategy meeting at the consulting firm where she worked. Her phone buzzed against the table. Once, twice, 7 times in a row. She'd excused herself, stepped into the hallway, and answered with irritation already rising in her throat. Mom, I'm working. Maya. Her mother's voice was shaking. Not the usual dramatic tremor she used when she wanted attention, but real fear, the kind that made Maya's stomach drop. I need you to come home. Now. Please. She'd left the meeting, caught a cab to her mother's apartment in Brooklyn. Found Elaine Bennett, her mother sitting at the kitchen table with papers spread in front of her like evidence at a crime scene, mascara streaked down her face. I didn't know, her mother kept saying. I didn't understand what I was signing. He said it was just authorization forms, standard procedure for the charity fund. Maya, I didn't know. The papers told a different story, or rather, they told the same story from a different angle. Elaine had signed documents transferring $40 million from Castellan Technologies' International Relief Fund into accounts that had nothing to do with charity. She'd been manipulated, yes, used by people who knew she was careless with details, who'd buried the real terms in legal language she'd never bother to read. But her signature was real. Her culpability was real. And federal investigators were already building a case. Maya had spent 3 days trying to find a solution. 3 days of lawyers who wouldn't return her calls and legal aid offices that took one. look at the numbers, and went pale. 3 days of watching her mother dissolve into panic attacks and prescription pills. On the 4th day, Leonardo Castellan showed up at Maya's apartment. She'd opened the door and found him standing there like death in an expensive coat. Tall, dark-haired, expression carved from granite. She'd seen his face in business magazines, always unsmiling, always intimidating. In person, he was worse. He took up too much space, made the air feel thinner. Miss Bennet. His voice was smooth, controlled, the kind of voice that never had to be raised to be obeyed. We need to talk. She should have slammed the door, should have called the police. Instead, she'd stepped aside and let him into her small Brooklyn apartment, watched him look around at her mismatched furniture and second-hand books like he was cataloging everything for some future use. Your mother, he said, not bothering with pleasantries, is facing federal charges for fraud and embezzlement. Minimum 15 years if convicted. Probably closer to 20 given the amount involved. Maya's throat went tight. I know. I can make it disappear. She'd laughed. Actually laughed, sharp and bitter. Why would you do that? That's your money she stole. She didn't steal it. Leo's eyes were gray, cold as winter ocean. She was used, manipulated by people trying to damage my company. Your mother is a pawn, Miss Bennet, not a criminal. The prosecutors won't see it that way. The prosecutors will see it however I tell them to see it. He said it like a fact, like his words could reshape reality. I have the resources to bury this case before it reaches court. The evidence can be reframed. The charges can be dropped. Your mother can go back to her life. Maya's hands curled into fists at her sides. What do you want? I'm going to give you 2 choices. He stepped closer, and she hated that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. Choice 1. I do nothing. Your mother goes to prison. Your family is destroyed. You spend the next 20 years visiting her behind glass. Her chest tightened. And choice 2? You marry me. The words hung in the air like smoke. For a moment, Maya was sure she'd misheard. Then his expression remained unchanged, and she realized he was completely serious. You're insane. I need a wife. His tone didn't change. Might as well have been discussing quarterly earnings. I'm finalizing an acquisition that requires public stability. The board needs assurance of personal investment. Additionally, my father's trust includes a clause requiring I appear settled to retain controlling shares of the company. My cousin is actively trying to undermine my position. A marriage solves multiple problems. So buy an escort, hire an actress. I need someone real, someone who won't lie to me or sell stories to the press. His eyes dragged over her face, analytical. You're smart, self-sufficient. You have integrity, even when it's inconvenient. I've had you investigated, Miss Bennet. You don't lie. I can trust that. You want to marry me because I'm honest. She couldn't keep the disbelief from her voice. That's insane. That's business. He pulled an envelope from his coat, set it on her coffee table. The case against your mother is already being handled. Charges will be dropped within the week. But the price is your agreement. She stared at him, at the envelope, at the trap he'd already sprung before she'd even known she was caught. You've already protected her, Maya said slowly. You did it before you came here. Yes. So this isn't really a choice. No. Something flickered in his expression, almost like respect. It's not. Maya looked at the envelope, thought of her mother, of 15 years behind bars, of the fact that Elaine had been stupid, but not malicious, used, but not evil. How long? Her voice came out steady. She was proud of that. 1 year. Then we divorce quietly. You walk away with compensation for your time. When? 4 days. Saturday evening. She closed her eyes, opened them, met his cold gray stare with her own. Fine. He nodded once, turned to leave, paused at the door. Miss Bennet? Don't make me regret this. Then he was gone, and Maya was alone with the envelope and the ruins of her freedom. 4 days until she became Mrs. Leonardo Castellan. 4 days until the trap closed completely. The wedding happened on a Saturday evening in a hotel ballroom that cost more than Maya's annual salary. Large, cold, corporate. Over 200 guests filled the space, none of whom Maya had ever met. Business associates, board members, shareholders, people in expensive suits who smiled with their mouths but not their eyes, who looked at her like she was a new acquisition Leo had made, something to be appraised and cataloged. She wore white because that's what was expected, a dress that had been selected by Leo's assistant and delivered to her apartment with no input requested. It fit perfectly, which somehow made it worse. Like she was a doll being dressed for display. Maya felt like a beautifully wrapped sacrifice being led to an altar made of contracts and tax benefits. Leo stood at the front in a black suit that probably cost more than her car. He didn't smile when she walked down the aisle, didn't react at all. His face was carved from stone, expression unreadable, eyes fixed somewhere just past her shoulder, like he couldn't quite bring himself to look directly at her. The officiant spoke words about love and commitment that felt obscene given the circumstances. Maya responded at the right moments. So did Leo. Their voices were steady, professional, like they were signing off on a merger, not a marriage. When it came time for the photos, they stood together with careful distance between their bodies. The photographer kept asking them to get closer. Leo's hand would settle on her waist with all the warmth of a business handshake. Maya would smile until her face hurt. During one shot, when they were positioned facing each other with his hands loosely holding hers, she'd whispered low enough that only he could hear. "You hate this." His jaw tightened. Those gray eyes finally met hers, and for a moment she thought she saw something flicker there. Then it was gone, replaced by that same cold neutrality. "I don't feel anything." The words hit her like a slap. She'd known this was a business arrangement, had agreed to it with full awareness of what it wasn't, but hearing him say it so flatly, so carelessly, carved something hollow in her chest. She kept smiling for the camera, kept her chin up, refused to let him see that he'd wounded her. The officiant announced them as husband and wife. In traditional ceremonies, this was when the groom would kiss the bride. The guests leaned forward slightly in their seats, anticipating the moment. Leo extended his hand instead. Maya stared at the formal corporate gesture. Then she took his hand and shook it once, firm and professional, like they'd just closed a deal. Because they had. The guests applauded. Leo released her hand immediately. They turned to face the crowd as Mr. and Mrs. Castellan, standing side by side with an ocean of space between them. No kiss, no warmth, just signatures on paper and two people legally bound to a lie. The trap had closed, and Maya was already planning how to make him regret every cold word. The penthouse was sterile, white marble floors that echoed with every step, floor-to-ceiling windows that let in all the light but none of the warmth, furniture that looked like it belonged in a design magazine, untouched and unlived in, the kind of space that made you feel like a trespasser in your own home. Maya had arrived with 2 suitcases on Sunday afternoon. Leo had been in his office, didn't come out to greet her. His assistant had shown her to her room instead. Her room, not their room. The message was clear. That evening, Leo had finally emerged, found her unpacking in the guest bedroom at the far end of the hall from his. He'd stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, and delivered his terms like a corporate presentation. Separate bedrooms. His voice was flat, matter of fact. "I'll sleep in the master suite. You have this room and the adjoining bathroom. Stay out of my personal spaces." Maya had continued folding a sweater, said nothing. "No physical intimacy. This is a business arrangement. I expect you to respect those boundaries." She'd placed the sweater in a drawer, still silent. "In public, we present as a united couple. You smile. You play the role. You don't embarrass me or this family." He'd paused. "In private, you stay invisible. I have work to do. I can't have distractions. Stay invisible." Maya had turned then, looked at him directly for the first time since the wedding. His expression was unreadable, distant, like he was looking at a problem he'd already solved and filed away. She'd nodded, once. Leo had taken that as agreement, had left her alone to finish unpacking. But something inside Maya had rebelled immediately. Some part of her that had always pushed back against being told what to do, that had fought her way through every obstacle life had thrown at her, that refused to be diminished. If he wanted her invisible, she'd make sure he saw her everywhere. The first week, she started small. Monday morning, she'd bought a throw blanket in deep burgundy and draped it over the stark white couch in the living room, a splash of color in all that clinical emptiness. When she'd come home from running errands that afternoon, the blanket was gone. Folded and placed in the hall closet, she'd smiled. Tuesday, she'd added candles to the dining table, cream-colored, unscented, tasteful. They disappeared by evening, returned to whatever store he assumed she'd bought them from, she guessed. She'd smiled wider. Wednesday, she'd brought in a small plant for the kitchen windowsill, something green and alive. By Thursday morning, it was relocated to her bedroom. She'd laughed out loud. He never said a word, never confronted her, never acknowledged what she was doing. He just quietly, methodically, erased every trace of her presence the moment she added it, like he was defending his territory from invasion. Maya found it fascinating. This man who claimed to feel nothing was spending energy moving her things, noticing her changes, responding to her presence even as he pretended she didn't exist. She started testing boundaries, left her book on the coffee table. It would migrate to her nightstand, played music while cooking dinner. The volume would be lowered the next time she tried, opened the blackout curtains in the living room to let in natural light. They'd be closed again within hours. They didn't fight. Fighting would require conversation, acknowledgement, engagement. Instead, they battled through silence, through small territorial skirmishes, waged with throw pillows and lighting choices. Maya would add, Leo would subtract. She'd rearrange, he'd restore. A constant push and pull, action and reaction, neither of them willing to address what they were actually doing. By Friday, Maya had learned his patterns. He moved her things after she went to bed. She could hear him sometimes, moving through the penthouse in the dark, returning everything to its proper place, erasing her like she was a mistake he had to correct. Saturday morning, she'd left a coffee mug on the counter, her favorite one from home, chipped on the handle, stained from years of use. It clashed violently with his pristine kitchen. When she'd come back from her shower, the mug was washed and placed in the cabinet. But this time, there was a note on the counter in sharp, angular handwriting. Use the Castellan mugs. We have matching sets for a reason. Maya had picked up the note, read it twice, then carefully folded it and tucked it into her pocket. It was the first word he'd spoken to her since the wedding that wasn't a command or logistical necessity. She smiled for the rest of the day. He'd noticed her, responded to her, engaged with her, even if it was just to criticize her coffee mug. It was a crack in his armor, and Maya was very good at finding cracks. By the end of week 1, she knew exactly how this war would be fought, not with words or arguments or dramatic confrontations, but with persistence, with presence, with the slow, steady erosion of every wall he'd tried to build between them. He wanted her invisible? She'd make sure he couldn't stop seeing her. Week 2, Maya stopped reacting to his corrections and started studying him instead. Leo was a creature of rigid routine, up at 5:30 every morning. Coffee, black, no sugar. Shower at 5:45, exactly 12 minutes. Dressed by 6:15 in suits that probably cost more than her monthly salary. In his home office by 6:30, door closed, working until 8 when he'd leave for Castellan Technologies, without saying goodbye. He'd return around 7 in the evening, sometimes later. Would eat whatever minimal dinner he'd prepared for himself, usually something that required no actual cooking. Then back to his office until midnight, or beyond. He moved through the penthouse like a ghost, haunting his own life. Precise, controlled, untouchable. Maya decided to disrupt every single part of it. She started practicing yoga in the living room at 6 in the morning, right in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows that faced his office door. She'd wear fitted leggings and a sports bra, moving through poses that required stretching, bending, flexibility. The first morning, she'd heard his office door open, heard his footsteps stop, felt his stare like a physical weight on her skin as she moved through downward dog into cobra pose, arching her back, extending her body in ways that were impossible to ignore. She'd held the pose for 30 seconds, never looked at him, just breathed and stretched and pretended she didn't know he was there. His footsteps had eventually continued, but she'd heard the slight hesitation, the break in his perfect rhythm. She smiled into her next pose. The blinds in the penthouse were always closed. Leo kept them that way religiously, blocking out the Seattle skyline, the water view, the natural light. Like he was hiding from the world, or maybe from himself. Maya opened them, every single one. Let the city in. Let the light flood the cold, white spaces. He'd close them again each evening. She'd open them the next morning. Neither of them acknowledged the routine. Her hair products started appearing on his marble bathroom counter. She'd use the guest bath attached to her room, but occasionally she'd wander into the master suite when he was gone and leave traces of herself. Shampoo that smelled like jasmine, conditioner, a hairbrush with a few dark strands still caught in the bristles. He'd return them to her room without comment. She'd migrate them back the next day. Maya started cooking real dinners, not the sad, practical meals Leo made for himself, but food that smelled like comfort and home and everything his sterile penthouse wasn't. Garlic and herbs and roasted vegetables, pasta with homemade sauce, chicken that actually had seasoning. The smells would fill the entire space, impossible to ignore or erase. She'd make enough for two but only set one place. Would eat at the dining table while he stayed locked in his office, probably smelling everything he was refusing to acknowledge. Some nights the food would be gone in the morning, containers washed and returned to the cabinet. He never thanked her. She never asked if he'd eaten, but she kept cooking. 3 weeks in, Maya appeared in the kitchen one Saturday morning wearing a silk robe, short, black, tied loosely at the waist, in a way that suggested it might come undone with any sudden movement. She'd timed it perfectly. Knew Leo would be getting his coffee right around 7. He'd walked in, still half asleep, hair slightly damp from his shower. Reached for his usual mug, glanced up, froze completely. The coffee mug had slipped from his fingers, shattering against the marble floor in an explosion of ceramic and dark liquid. Maya had turned slowly, letting the robe shift with the movement, revealing the curve of her thigh, the line of her collarbone. "Morning," she'd said softly. Leo had stared at her like she'd set his kitchen on fire. His jaw was tight, his pupils dilated, his chest rose and fell with breaths that looked difficult. For 10 full seconds, neither of them moved. Then he bent down, started picking up broken ceramic with his bare hands, not even looking at what he was doing, just desperate for something to focus on that wasn't her body barely contained in black silk. "I'll clean it," Maya had offered. "Don't." His voice came out rough, raw. "Just go." She'd left, but not before catching the way his hands shook as he gathered the broken pieces. After that, Maya started paying closer attention. She'd noticed the way his gaze would track her when he thought she wasn't looking, how his jaw would clench when she'd stretch or bend or move in ways that made the silk she'd started wearing around the penthouse cling to her curves. One night, she'd walked past his bedroom door around midnight, had heard something that made her stop. Breathing. Heavy. Uneven. She'd pressed closer to the door, listening. The breathing was harsh, almost pained, like someone fighting something internal and losing. Maya had stood there in the dark hallway, her own breath caught in her throat, realizing what she was hearing. Leo, on the other side of the door, struggling with something he couldn't control. She'd heard her name, barely a whisper, rough and broken. "Maya." Her pulse had kicked into overdrive. Heat had flooded through her body. This man who claimed to feel nothing, who'd told her to stay invisible, who moved through life with mechanical precision. He was in his room at midnight, breathing her name like a prayer or a curse. Leo wasn't cold. Leo was repressed. Everything. The rigid routines, the sterile apartment, the rules, the distance. It was all control. Carefully constructed walls designed to keep something massive contained. And Maya had just realized she'd been chipping away at those walls for weeks. She'd walked back to her room that night with a smile on her face and a plan forming in her mind. If he was fighting this hard to maintain control, that meant there was something worth fighting. Something he wanted. Someone he wanted. And Maya had never been good at leaving things alone. Month 3, Maya decided to test a theory. She'd invited Marcus to meet her at the penthouse lobby. Marcus, her friend from grad school, who'd helped her survive statistics and late-night study sessions. Harmless, happily engaged to his boyfriend of 5 years. But Leo didn't know that. They met in the building's pristine marble lobby, all glass and chrome and expensive emptiness. Marcus had hugged her, lifting her slightly off her feet the way he always did, and Maya had laughed, genuinely happy to see a friendly face in this cold new world she'd been dropped into. She hadn't seen Leo, but Leo had seen her. He had been coming out of the private elevator that led directly to the penthouse, probably heading to the office for some weekend emergency. Had stopped dead when he'd spotted Maya in another man's arms. Maya had caught the movement in her peripheral vision, turned her head slightly, made eye contact with her husband across the lobby. Leo's face had gone completely blank, not cold, blank, like someone had erased every emotion and left nothing behind. But his body had gone rigid, every muscle locked tight, and his eyes had darkened to something almost black. He'd stood there for 5 full seconds, watching, then walked past them without acknowledgement, out the building's front doors and into the rain. Maya had felt the look like a brand against her skin. That night, Leo came home different, darker, quieter. Something predatory moving beneath his skin that hadn't been there before. He moved through the penthouse like a storm contained in human form, every step deliberate, every movement controlled but barely. Maya was in the kitchen when he returned from wherever he'd disappeared to all day. She'd made dinner again. Pasta, wine, 2 place settings this time because she was feeling bold. "I made enough for both of us," she'd said casually. He'd paused, looked at the table, then sat down across from her without a word. They'd eaten in silence for several minutes, the kind of silence that pressed against your eardrums and made breathing feel loud. Then Leo spoke, his voice low and carefully neutral, his eyes fixed on his plate. "Don't bring men here." Maya's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. She set it down slowly, a smile playing at her lips. "That was just Marcus. A friend." "I don't care who he is." Leo's jaw tightened. "Don't bring men to my home." She leaned back in her chair, the movement causing her dress to shift. She'd worn something fitted tonight, deep blue that clung to her curves. She ran her tongue slowly across her bottom lip, watching him, then adjusted the neckline of her dress, pulling it slightly lower, the gesture unmistakably deliberate. "Why?" Her voice came out soft, almost a purr. "Are you trying to be possessive?" Leo's hand clenched around his fork, knuckles going white. His eyes finally lifted to hers, and what she saw there made her breath catch. Hunger. Raw and barely restrained. His gaze dropped to her mouth, where she'd just licked her lips. Then lower, following the line of her throat down to where she'd adjusted her dress. His pupils dilated, his breathing changed, became heavier. "Maya." His voice cracked on her name, rough, almost pained. "Don't." It was barely a whisper, a warning and a plea wrapped together. She watched, fascinated, as a flush crept up his neck, as his jaw clenched and unclenched, as he shifted in his seat, uncomfortable, and she realized with a sharp spike of satisfaction exactly why. He was hard. The realization hit her like electricity. This man who claimed to feel nothing, who'd barely touched her in 3 months, who treated her like an inconvenient piece of furniture. He was sitting across from her, aroused, and fighting desperately to hide it. But Maya could see it. The tension in his shoulders, the way he'd angled his body slightly away from the table. The careful stillness he'd adopted, like any movement, might shatter his control completely. She opened her mouth to push further, to test exactly how far she could take this. Leo stood abruptly. His chair scraped against the floor with a harsh sound. He turned away from her quickly, but not before she caught a glimpse of the evidence straining against his perfectly tailored pants. "I have work," he said, voice tight. "Thank you for dinner." He walked away rigidly, every step measured, his body language screaming restraint. Maya sat alone at the table, heart pounding, skin flushed, breathless with the power of what she'd just discovered. She'd broken through his control, made him feel something he couldn't hide or rationalize or erase with silence. She'd made him want her so badly he had to run. And the most dangerous part? She'd liked it. Liked the way he'd looked at her with those dark, hungry eyes. Liked the crack in his voice when he'd said her name. Liked knowing that underneath all that ice was fire, and she was the one holding the match. This war between them had just shifted, and Maya was winning. 2 days later, Maya found one of Leo's dress shirts in the laundry. White, expensive, still smelling faintly of his cologne. She put it on. The shirt fell to mid-thigh on her, the sleeves hanging past her fingertips until she rolled them up. She left it barely buttoned, just 3 buttons holding it together, enough to technically be wearing something but not enough to hide anything that mattered. The hem rose dangerously high when she moved, exposing the curve of her ass, the lower swell almost completely visible. She wore nothing underneath. That evening, she cooked dinner in his kitchen wearing his shirt, her legs bare, her hair loose down her back. She heard the elevator doors open, heard his footsteps in the hallway, kept stirring the sauce on the stove, adding herbs, focused on her task like she wasn't wearing his clothes and almost nothing else. Leo walked into the kitchen and stopped dead. She didn't turn around immediately. Let him look. Let him absorb exactly what he was seeing. His wife in his shirt, the fabric draping over her curves, her bare legs, the unmistakable knowledge that she was wearing nothing beneath the thin white cotton. Outside, thunder rumbled. Rain lashed against the windows. The storm that had been threatening all day had finally broken, and the weather matched whatever was happening inside Leo's chest. When Maya finally glanced over her shoulder, his face was a storm of its own. His briefcase had fallen from his hand, hitting the floor with a dull thud he didn't seem to notice. His tie was loosened, top button undone like he'd been pulling at it all day. His eyes were dark, fixed on her, with an intensity that made her skin burn. "Maya!" His voice came out hoarse, wrecked. She turned fully to face him, and the movement made the shirt shift, gaping open just slightly more. Leo's breath audibly caught. "I can't do this anymore." The words tumbled out, rough and broken. "Not with you walking around like—" He cut himself off violently, crossed the kitchen in 3 strides, and slammed his hand on the marble counter beside her. Not touching her, but close. So close she could feel the heat radiating off his body, could smell his cologne mixed with rain and something darker, something that spoke of control unraveling. His other hand gripped the counter edge on her opposite side, caging her in. Maya's pulse skyrocketed. She tilted her head back to look at him, and what she saw in his face stole her breath. Hunger, desperation, fury at himself, and at her, and at whatever this thing between them had become. "If I touch you," he whispered, his voice shaking with restraint that was clearly killing him, "I won't stop." The words hung between them like a grenade with the pin pulled. Maya's lips parted, her body leaned toward his, drawn by gravity or insanity or 3 months of this torture. His phone rang. The sound shattered the moment like glass exploding. Leo's eyes closed. His jaw clenched so hard she heard his teeth grind. His whole body was trembling with the effort of not closing the few inches between them. The phone kept ringing. He pushed away from the counter violently, grabbed his phone from his pocket, and answered without checking who it was. "What?" A single word, bitten off harsh. He listened for a moment, his free hand dragging through his hair, messing up the perfect style. His eyes stayed locked on Maya the entire time, burning with everything he wasn't allowing himself to do. "I'll handle it," he said finally. then ended the call and walked out of the kitchen without another word. Maya heard his office door slam, heard something hit the wall inside. Maybe his phone, maybe his fist. She stood alone in the kitchen wearing his shirt, her legs shaking, her skin flushed, her breath coming fast. Not from fear, from victory. From the knowledge that she'd finally, completely, broken through his control. He'd admitted it. Out loud. If I touch you, I won't stop. Maya went to bed that night knowing something had shifted, knowing the walls were crumbling, knowing that one of them would break soon. She just didn't know it would be tonight. That night, Maya couldn't sleep. She'd tried, had lain in bed for 2 hours listening to Leo pace in his office, back and forth like a caged animal. The sound had driven her slowly insane until finally she'd gotten up, pulled on the transparent satin nightgown she'd bought last week and hadn't yet had the courage to wear. Black. Sheer. Leaving absolutely nothing to imagination. Her body was completely visible through the fabric, every curve, every line, everything on display. She stepped into the hallway, defiant, done with waiting, done with this dance, done with pretending she didn't want him as badly as he clearly wanted her. Leo's office door opened. He stopped when he saw her, stood frozen in his doorway, still wearing his dress pants and white undershirt, tie discarded somewhere, looking exhausted and wrecked and barely holding himself together. His eyes dragged down her body, taking in the transparent satin, the way it clung to her skin, the absolute lack of anything hidden. Something in his face cracked. He moved toward her with purpose, each step deliberate, predatory, and Maya's heart slammed against her ribs as he backed her against the hallway wall. His hand slammed on either side of her head, caging her in, his body so close she could feel the heat of him, but still not touching. His chest was heaving like he'd been running, eyes wild and dark and full of everything he'd been holding back for months. You think I haven't wanted you every night since the wedding? His voice was ragged, barely controlled. You think I don't hear you breathing in your room and imagine what you'd sound like underneath me? Maya's breath caught. You think I don't feel myself getting hard every time you walk around in those fucking robes? His voice was getting rougher, darker, each word torn from somewhere deep. Every time you bend over in those tight pants, every time you lick your goddamn lips and look at me like you're daring me to break. She could see his pulse pounding in his throat, could see the flush spreading across his skin, could see exactly how much this confession was costing him. You think I don't see you in my dreams every single night? He leaned closer, his mouth near her ear, his breath hot against her skin. That I don't wake up hard and aching because I've been dreaming about tasting every inch of you? Maya's entire body was on fire. She could barely breathe, barely think, barely exist under the weight of his words and his presence and the raw need radiating off him. Then take me, Leo. Her voice came out as a whisper, a challenge, an invitation. He made a sound low in his throat, somewhere between a growl. His forehead dropped to the wall beside her head, his whole body trembling with restraint. You don't understand what happens if I stop controlling myself. His voice shook. I've been holding back for so long, Maya. If I touch you, if I let myself have you. She reached up and touched his jaw, felt the muscle jump beneath her fingers, felt the roughness of stubble he hadn't shaved, then lose control. Something snapped. Leo's mouth crashed into hers with a desperation that stole her breath. It wasn't gentle or careful or restrained. It was rough and starving and full of 3 months of torture finally breaking free. He kissed her like he was drowning and she was air, like he'd been dying of thirst and she was water. His hands left the wall and grabbed her waist, pulling her body flush against his. She could feel exactly how hard he was. The evidence pressed against her through the thin barrier of his pants and her transparent satin. Maya gasped into his mouth and his tongue swept in, claiming, demanding. His hand slid down to grip her thighs, and he lifted her like she weighed nothing. Her legs wrapped around his waist automatically, ankles locking behind his back. The movement pressed her core directly against him, and they both reacted to the contact. He turned, pressing her harder against the wall, his hips grinding into hers in a rhythm that made her head fall back. His mouth moved to her throat, marking her skin like he was trying to brand her as his. "Leo," she breathed, her fingers tangling in his hair, pulling. He growled against her neck, his hands gripping her through the satin, kneading, pulling her tighter against him. Every movement sent pleasure shooting through her body, building tension that was already unbearable. "Bedroom," he rasped against her skin. "Now." He carried her down the hallway, her legs still wrapped around him, his mouth never leaving her throat. Not to her room, to his. The room he'd never let her enter, the last sacred space in his fortress of control. He kicked the door open. They stumbled inside together, all desperate hands and frantic kisses, and clothes that needed to be gone immediately. The war was over, and they'd both lost. Or maybe they'd both won. It was impossible to tell the difference anymore when his hands were on her skin and his mouth was claiming hers, and 3 months of denial was finally, violently, coming to an end. Leo's bedroom was darker than the rest of the penthouse, heavier. The curtains were thick, blocking out the city lights. The bed was massive, black sheets that looked like they'd never been disturbed. This was his sanctuary, the one place he'd kept completely separate from her. Until now. He carried her to the bed and laid her down with a gentleness that contrasted violently with the desperation in his kiss moments before. His hands trembled as they traced the straps of her transparent nightgown, sliding them down her shoulders with agonizing slowness. Leo leaned over her, his body covering hers without quite touching, and his mouth found her ear. "After tonight, Maya." His voice was dark velvet and broken promises. "You won't want another man again. I'll ruin you for anyone else." It wasn't arrogance. It was a vow. Maya's breath hitched as he peeled the satin from her body, exposing her completely. His eyes roamed over her like he was memorizing every curve, every freckle, every detail he'd been denying himself for 3 months. "God, you're perfect." The words came out reverent, awed, like he couldn't quite believe she was real. Then his mouth was on her skin, and thought became impossible. He kissed her everywhere, slowly at first, then with increasing hunger. Her collarbone, the valley between her chest, her stomach, her hip bone. Each touch deliberate, claiming, marking her as his in ways that had nothing to do with marriage contracts. Maya arched beneath him, her hands finding his shoulders, his back, trying to pull him closer. But Leo was taking his time, like he'd been fantasizing about this for so long that he needed to savor every second. "Leo, please." Her voice broke on his name. He looked up at her, eyes dark with desire, and something deeper. Something that looked almost like fear. "I've wanted this," he whispered against her skin. "Wanted you. So badly it was killing me." His confession cracked something open inside her chest. She pulled him up to her, kissed him with everything she'd been holding back. Not just desire, but emotion. The loneliness of 3 months sleeping alone, the frustration of being invisible, the need to be seen, to be wanted, to matter to someone. Leo responded like she'd broken the last chain holding him back. His clothes disappeared. She wasn't sure if she tore them off or he did. Then there was nothing between them, just skin and heat, and the frantic need to get closer. The sensation overwhelming, perfect, like 2 pieces finally fitting together after being forced apart. Leo froze, his forehead pressed to hers, breathing hard. "Maya," he whispered, just her name. But it sounded like a prayer, and a confession, and an apology all at once. It was intense, emotional, explosive. Not just bodies coming together, but something deeper, breaking open between them. 3 months of tension, of denial, of silent warfare erupting into something neither of them could control or contain. He was demanding and giving all at once. Taking her, apart, simultaneously holding her like she was precious. Like she was the first soft thing he'd ever been allowed to touch in his life of sharp edges and cold marble. Maya wrapped herself around him, legs, arms, everything, holding on as pleasure built to something almost painful. Her nails dragged down his back and he groaned, the sound primal and broken. "Look at me," he commanded, his voice rough. She opened her eyes and found him staring at her with an intensity that stole her breath. His control was completely shattered. She could see everything in his face, the want, the need, the emotion he'd been burying for months. "I'm yours," he said, and it sounded like a confession torn from his soul. "I've been yours since the moment you stepped out in that goddamn towel and looked at me like you weren't afraid." The words pushed her over the edge. She shattered around him. They collapsed together, breathing hard, bodies tangled, both of them trembling from the intensity. Confession and surrender. Leo rolled slightly to the side, but kept her pulled tight against his chest, his arms wrapped around her like he was afraid she'd disappear if he let go. His hand stroked her hair with a tenderness that made her throat tight. "Stay," he whispered into the darkness. "Don't go back to your room. Stay here." Maya pressed closer, feeling his heartbeat against her cheek, still racing as hard as hers. "I'm not going anywhere," she whispered back. For the first time in 3 months, they fell asleep together, and the penthouse felt a little less cold. The next morning, Maya woke up in Leo's bed wearing his t-shirt, sunlight streaming through curtains he'd actually opened for the first time. His arm was wrapped around her waist, his body curved protectively around hers. Everything had changed. They'd spent the weekend in his bedroom, leaving only for food and water, learning each other, talking in ways they never had before. Leo had told her about his father's impossible standards, about growing up in a family where emotion was weakness and control was survival. Maya had told him about her mother's chaos, about always being the responsible one, about feeling trapped by duty, but choosing it anyway. They'd mapped each other's scars and found they fit together better broken than they ever would have whole. Monday morning, Leo had kissed her before leaving for work, actually kissed her goodbye, his hand gentle on her jaw, like she was something precious he was reluctant to leave. "I'll be home early," he'd promised. Maya had spent the day smiling for no reason. That lasted until Tuesday afternoon. The article appeared in Seattle Business Review's online edition at 2 p.m. Maya's phone started buzzing with notifications within minutes. Then her mother called, voice shaking. Then Leo's assistant called, professional but urgent. Maya opened the article with dread pooling in her stomach. Castellan's convenient marriage, gold digger or strategic move. The piece was poison dressed up as journalism. It detailed Maya's sudden marriage to one of Seattle's wealthiest tech billionaires, mentioned her mother's legal troubles that had mysteriously disappeared right before the wedding, quoted anonymous sources calling Maya a social climber who'd trapped Leo into marriage, suggested she'd been planted by competitors to destabilize Castellan Technologies from within. Every word was carefully chosen to destroy her reputation without technically committing libel. At the bottom, buried in the byline credits, Maya found what she was looking for. Contributing Research by Dorian Castellan. Leo's cousin. She'd met Dorian once, at a family dinner 2 weeks after the wedding. He'd been charming, elegant, with the same gray eyes as Leo, but colder somehow. Calculating. He'd looked at Maya like she was a problem to be solved or eliminated. Now she understood why. Leo came home at 4, which was early for him, but not the early he'd promised. His face was dark, with fury barely contained. "Did you see it?" Maya asked from where she stood by the windows. "I saw it." His voice was tight, controlled, the kind of control that meant violence was close to the surface. "I'm handling it." "Handling it how?" "I'm going to destroy him." The words were said so calmly, they were almost more frightening than if he'd shouted them. Leo pulled out his phone, made a call. "Where is he?" "Good. Tell him I'm coming. Tell him if he's smart, he'll wait for me." He ended the call and looked at Maya. Some of the fury softened when their eyes met. "This is about the company," Leo said. "Dorian wants my position. He's been undermining me for years, but he can't touch me directly. So he's going after you." "Why me?" "Because he thinks you're my weakness." Leo crossed to her, took her face in his hands. He thinks destroying your reputation will destabilize me emotionally, make me vulnerable, give him an opening to convince the board I'm unfit to lead. Maya's throat tightened. Is it working? Am I making you vulnerable? Yes. Leo's thumb stroked her cheek. But not in the way he thinks. You make me want things I never let myself want before. You make me feel things I've spent my whole life avoiding. That terrifies me more than any business threat. He kissed her forehead gently. But it also makes me more dangerous than I've ever been, because now I have something to protect. He left for Dorian's office, and Maya spent the rest of the evening pacing, reading the article over and over, watching the comments section fill with speculation and judgment from strangers. Leo returned after 9. His knuckles were red. Did you hit him? Maya asked. I wanted to. Leo's jaw tightened. I didn't, but I made things very clear. Touch your name again, and I'll bury his career so deep he'll never see daylight. I have evidence of every shady deal he's made, every corner he's cut, every rule he's bent. I've been collecting it for years. Why didn't you use it before? Because he's family. Leo looked tired suddenly, worn. Because my father always said family loyalty mattered more than anything. But he was wrong. He pulled Maya into his arms, held her tight. You matter more. The words settled into her chest, warm and solid and real. But the threat wasn't over. The shareholder event was scheduled for Friday evening, a quarterly presentation that Leo couldn't cancel without looking weak. Maya had planned to skip it, stay home and avoid the whispers and stares. Leo had other plans. You're coming, he'd said Thursday night. We face this together. So Friday evening, Maya wore a dress that cost more than her old monthly rent. Deep emerald, that made her skin glow and her confidence rise. Leo wore a black suit that made him look dangerous and untouchable. They arrived together, his hand firm on her lower back. The room fell noticeably quieter when they entered. Maya could feel the stares, the judgment, the speculation. Could see people whispering behind their champagne glasses, phones coming out to photograph the gold digger who'd trapped Leonardo Castellan. Leo felt her tense, his hand pressed more firmly against her back. Breathe, he murmured. You belong here. They're just too stupid to realize it yet. The presentation started. Leo took the stage, commanding and brilliant, walking through quarterly earnings and strategic initiatives with the kind of authority that made it obvious why he ran a billion-dollar company. Then Dorian stood up. He was in the third row, perfectly positioned, smiling sharp as a knife. Before we conclude, Dorian's voice carried through the room, smooth and poisonous. I think shareholders deserve transparency about potential conflicts of interest affecting leadership decisions. Leo's expression didn't change, but Maya saw his hands tighten on the podium. The recent acquisition of a spouse under questionable circumstances, Dorian continued, raises questions about judgment and vulnerability to manipulation, particularly given the convenient timing with certain legal matters involving the spouse's family. The room erupted in whispers. Maya's face burned. She wanted to disappear. Wanted to run. Wanted to be anywhere but here, being dissected by strangers. Leo stepped away from the podium. The room fell silent. He walked down from the stage, moving through the crowd with purpose, every eye following him. He walked directly to Maya, standing in the back row trying to disappear into the wall. His hand extended to her. Maya stared at it. At him. At the choice he was offering in front of everyone. She took his hand. Leo pulled her forward, keeping her hand firmly in his, and walked them both to the stage. The whispers grew louder. Phones came out. This would be all over social media in minutes. Leo took the microphone, his other arm sliding around Maya's waist, pulling her against his side. The gesture was unmistakable. Possessive, protective, claiming. Let me be absolutely clear. Leo's voice filled the room, cold and sharp and final. This is my wife, my partner, my choice. He turned slightly, looked down at Maya with an expression that made her breath catch. Then, with hundreds of people watching, with cameras recording, with his career potentially on the line. Leo kissed her. Not a peck, not a performance. A real kiss. Deep and claiming, and full of everything that had grown between them over 4 months of warfare and surrender. When he pulled back, he turned to face the crowd again. Maya still held tight against him. Anyone who has a problem with my marriage is welcome to take it up with me directly. Or they can sell their shares and leave. His eyes found Dorian in the crowd. But what you will not do is disrespect my wife. Not in this room, not in the press, not anywhere. The silence was deafening. Then someone started clapping. One person. Then another. Then half the room was applauding, and the other half was stunned into silence. Dorian's face had gone white with rage. Leo handed the microphone back to the moderator. "We're done here." He walked Maya off the stage, through the crowd that parted for them like water, out of the event entirely. In the car, Maya couldn't speak, couldn't process what had just happened. Leo had chosen her, publicly, irrevocably, had put his reputation, his company, his carefully controlled image on the line for her. "You didn't have to do that," she finally whispered. Leo took her hand, brought it to his lips. "Yes," he said simply. "I did." And Maya realized she'd been wrong about everything. This marriage hadn't been a trap. It had been a rescue, for both of them. They didn't go back to the event. Leo drove them home through rain-slicked streets, his hand never leaving hers. When the elevator doors opened to the penthouse, Maya stepped out and froze. Everything was different. The cold, white expanse she'd moved into 4 months ago had transformed. A warm burgundy rug now covered the marble floor in the living room, the same one she'd bought in week 1 that Leo had returned to the store. Soft lamps cast golden light instead of the harsh overhead fixtures he'd always preferred. The blackout curtains were gone completely, replaced with sheer panels that let in the city lights and made the space feel alive. But what made her throat tighten was the photograph. It sat on the side table in a simple silver frame. Maya laughing, her head thrown back, joy captured in a moment she didn't even remember being photographed. It must have been from one of the weekends after they'd finally stopped fighting and started living. She looked happy. Free. Real. And Leo had put it where he'd see it every single day. "When did you?" Her voice cracked. "This week." Leo came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, pulled her back against his chest. "After the article. After Dorian tried to destroy you. I realized this place still looked like I was trying to keep you out, instead of making room for you to stay." Maya's eyes burned with tears, and she refused to let fall. On the kitchen windowsill sat a small succulent in a terracotta pot, green and thriving. The same type of plant she'd brought home in week 2 that he'd relocated to her bedroom. "You remembered," she whispered. "I remember everything." His lips brushed her temple. Every throw pillow. Every candle. Every small way you tried to make this cold place feel like home. I fought you on all of it because I was terrified. Of what? Of this. His arms tightened around her. Of wanting you. Of needing you. Of my entire world shifting to revolve around someone else. I spent my whole life building walls, and you walked in and dismantled every single one. Maya turned in his arms, looked up at his face. The man who'd been carved from ice and fury 4 months ago now looked at her with such open emotion it stole her breath. "I love you," Leo said, the words rough but sure. "I didn't plan to. I definitely didn't want to. But I do. I love you so much it terrifies me." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I love you too. Even when I hated you, I think I was falling in love with you." He kissed her then, slow and deep and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, Leo rested his forehead against hers, his hands framing her face, like she was something precious he was still learning to hold without breaking. "You don't live in my house anymore, Maya." His voice was velvet and devotion and forever. He kissed her neck softly, the gesture tender and claiming all at once. You live in my life, in every corner of it. You're in my thoughts when I wake up, and my dreams when I sleep, and every breath in between. Maya smiled through her tears. Good, because you're stuck with me now. Promise? Promise. They stood there in the transformed penthouse, wrapped in each other, the city lights glowing through the windows and the rain drumming against glass. The forced marriage had become a real one. The contract had become a covenant. The war had become love, and the cold, sterile penthouse had finally become a home. Because Maya Bennett Castellan had walked into Leonardo Castellan's perfectly controlled life and set it beautifully, irreversibly on fire. And neither of them would ever want it any other way. If this story of Leo and Maya's journey from forced marriage to fiery love kept you captivated, share it with someone who loves intense, emotional romance. Because sometimes the best love stories start with the worst circumstances. Drop a comment and tell us, what was your favorite moment? The towel scene? The kitchen confrontation? Or when Leo finally chose Maya in front of everyone? Subscribe for more tales of passion, power, and the kind of love that breaks through every wall. Thank you, lovely listeners.